Absolute Superman is, oh my God, just when I didn't think it could get any better, it gets amazing. Okay, so in this video, we actually take a break from all the escapades of Superman in the here and now, and we focus on when he first arrived to Earth. And it's really cool, but really tragic at the same time. Because as most of you guys know, when Superman shows up to Earth, it's a almost kind of fairy tale type story, in the sense that Krypton explodes, which is the least fairy tale part of it, but then he's drifting through space as a baby and then arrives on Earth. And there's virtually nothing that really happens during that time period. This is almost the total opposite, because what he says here is, when my family's rocket lifted off from Krypton, we had no idea where we were headed. The Science League, ever consumed with themselves, had never bothered to explore what else might be out there. My parents always said that we would find our way to a new home together, but then our planet rotted from within and my parents died, while I flew on alone across seas of endless nothing. So for something like 17 months, he's just flying through space, isolated, basically in solitary confinement, and it's a part of the story that we never get to see. Now, in reality, if this was him as a baby, he would have no clue what's going on, right? He would be eating and he would be sleeping and he would be pooping, and that would basically be it. But as a young adult, he's got full sentience. He understands what's going on around him. And so literally he's trapped in a tomb, flying through space, and it's tragic. Right? It tears him apart from the inside out, because as time goes on, he actually just kind of starts to lose his will to live. This, coupled with the fact that the scientists on Krypton never charted the star systems, means they're basically flying blind. So they have no real destination. They're just flying through space, hoping that something can be found where he can call home. And so that's why he starts to say, star slide engines flying 1 billion clicks a second. That means we've traveled 9 million light years. 9 million light years from Krypton. And remind me, Saul, how many inhabitable worlds have we found? And initially we're Saul, right? The kind of living ship that is both his suit as well as the actual vessel itself, where it encompasses him, and it just kind of almost sort of dodges the question. It's like, how many worlds have we found? And it's just like 0. We have found 0 habitable worlds. There have been no habitable worlds whatsoever. There seems to potentially be a habitable world in this star system that we're approaching, but I don't know for sure, and we won't know until we get closer. Now, the kind of unwritten statement that's being made here is, this seems to have happened multiple times before. Hey, Kal-El, I think I may have found a star system that can be a home for us. It turns out they don't really have an atmosphere that can sustain human life. So let's continue on to the next one. And that happens over and over and over again. And with every disappointment, the will erodes more and more. I mean, truthfully, if this wasn't really just a Superman story, it'd be a perfect time for a Green Lantern ring to show up and say, like, you have great willpower because you just haven't offed yourself. Welcome to the Green Lantern Corps, right? And that would be it. But kind of focusing on this, right? The idea of him losing his drive and losing his motivation and will to go on comes in the statement when he says, there's nothing out here. Krypton was all there was. Our one chance, and we blew it. And I don't think I want to do this anymore. Now, the reality here is Kal-El is highly emotional, right? That's really what it is. Number one, he's a young person, right? Young people are inherently far more emotional, hormones and all that kind of stuff, just everything's raging inside their body, and so they're kind of figuring themselves out. But the other part of this is Saul approaches with the kind of cold logic that only really a computer system could give, where it says, space is beyond vast, but the statistical probability is quite high that other life-bearing planets do exist. But it's not really what Kal-El wants to hear. That usually in moments of high emotional duress, we don't want logic and reason. We want other people to be emotional with us. Now, sometimes that's a good thing because it helps people become closer. Sometimes it's a bad thing because what you're asking for is for the other person to just sit and be miserable with you. And that's not going to help anybody. So again, it's one of these things where in his youth and his young age, he hasn't really figured out how to handle these things yet. So combining the just struggles of being a young person with the total eradication of his home, the death of his parents, and the destruction of Krypto, his dog, seemingly, I still curse Jason Aaron for doing that, he's in a very, very tough place. But not all is lost, because what he tells Saul is, just drop me off here in this sun. Just leave me here, right? I just want to, like, the sun will do its job, right? It'll take care of things incredibly fast. And where Saul starts going on about how, Kal-El, I can't do that. I'm here to protect you. That suddenly Kal-El starts feeling heat, right? Why is it so hot in here all of a sudden? His body's burning up, his temperature's skyrocketing, his eyes are glowing red, and just comes crashing down into Earth, right? Careening into Earth itself, landing in Kansas. Now, here's the other part of the story, and this is one of the things that I love about what Jason Aaron has done with this that keeps it intact. Since time immemorial, right? Since like eons, the idea of Jonathan and Martha Kent discovering Clark has just been the cornerstone of the Superman mythos. It's like one of the very few aspects of his history that never changes. It is absolutely universal. Now, the circumstances under which they found him and how their lives were unfolding, that's expanded drastically over the years. That the general gist, regardless of what era of Spider-Man comics you're reading, outside of the original Action Comics #1 from Vince Sullivan, Jerry Siegel, and Joe Shuster, is that they're struggling to have children. And of course, they run a farm and they do all that kind of stuff. But here in the Absolute Universe, keep in mind, Lazarus is a paramilitary force that kind of runs the world with an iron fist. And so you have Jonathan and Martha Kent who are here, but they also talk about the influence that Lazarus has on their lives, which is to say that because they refuse to sell their property, that what Lazarus has been doing is running drones up in the sky that restricts the weather on their farm. Literally, it never rains. And so because it doesn't rain, it dries the crops, and the crops basically are the entire source of their ability to live. Without that, they will either die of starvation, and Lazarus will take the property, or they'll be forced to sell. But one of the cool things about this, and it's kind of a testament to just the strong characters that Jonathan and Martha have, is even in the face of all of that, they refuse to sell. Now, some might call it foolish, some might call it brave. There's no real right way to look at it, but it's one of these things where the logic is that Jonathan Kent and the family he hails from, they have been fighting for their living in the hills ever since they first discovered it. And that when Martha took his namesake, she agreed to that same thing as well, and that she had always kind of been a member of the family in terms of just her personality traits and her strong character. And so while they're kind of quote unquote praying for a miracle, so to speak, one comes flying in the form of Superman. And that's where Jason Aaron focuses so much on maintaining that classic Superman mythos, because you have to. It's one of the things that you just cannot screw with. If you're a writer and you come along and you start shifting up the origin of Superman, you're going to piss people off to no end. It's what Bendis did, and everybody hated his run. One of the worst Superman runs in the history of the comic. And so it's one of the things you have to maintain. What's so cool is Jason Aaron keeps it familiar, but changes it up just enough to make it fit within the confines of the story. Because as soon as Clark arrives here, because Saul is, again, the kind of technology that keeps him protected and everything, given the vast amount of energy that it had to use in order to get him here, it powers down. And in fact, it actually shuts down for several weeks. And so the only real thing they can't see right off the bat is Kal-El just like reaching out to them and then immediately passing out after speaking in a language that they cannot understand, right? Because they don't speak Kryptonese. So what this does is it kind of follows their characters, and it fills in, again, this old school history that with Kal-El crash landing on their farm on Earth, while they were never really able to have kids before, they can adopt one, and they can make up any story they want to for why he's here, and he's as good as their own, which is exactly what happens, but not without a bit of humor. Because one of the things that goes on here is that because the yellow sun is, again, supercharging the cells of Clark Kent, or at least Kal-El, and his powers are starting to emerge, it's kind of amazing, right? Like, he's sort of in and out of consciousness. His body goes through like seizures. He destroys the entire bed. He's levitating in the air, and like Jonathan thinks he's a demon and Martha thinks he's an angel. Right? Like, his heat vision kicks in and just starts firing like heat vision all over the place. And so again, like, as time passes, Martha refuses to let him go. Right? Martha refuses to just be like, we need to get rid of him. Like, we have to do something like that. Jonathan is just like, we can't keep him here. Right? I mean, given what he's displayed, the level of strength he seems to have, the fact that he's floating, this is just more than we can handle. We don't know how to process it. We don't know how to deal with this. But the response of Martha is, well, that's the job of parents, isn't it? Right? You thrust yourself into a situation that you're not prepared for. You're flying by the seat of your pants every step of the way. But your job is to just kind of figure it out as you go along. That's it. Why anybody would do that is anyone's guess. I don't know, but that's what you do. And so in response to that, Jonathan just kind of hangs out. Now, the cool thing about this is that they both have their own perceptions on the role that Clark plays in their life. And we'll talk about that here in a second, because one of the things that happens is that as they're just kind of figuring out what to do, suddenly he wakes up and goes flying out of the house, right? And so what he says here is, I'd torn through a house and fields and some sort of town before I even realized I was running. Somehow running so blindly fast that the world around me was a blur. Me, Kal-El, slowest, clumsiest kid in all the Redlands. But this was not the Redlands. Krypton had exploded in a ball of fire. This was a strange alien world where the sun made me want to claw the skin from my bones. What was this land of surreal horror where Saul had stranded me? I would come to learn it was a place called Kansas. Waves rippled through a sea of gold that stretched to the horizon. No sound to be heard except the wind. I'd flown 9 million light years, yet somehow, impossibly, I was home. And it's this really, really beautiful moment, because what this kind of shows here, right, as crazy as it seems, and maybe it's a matter of interpretation, he feels potentially more at home here than he ever did at Krypton, or at the very least, it feels as much of a home as Krypton ever did. And after that, he just starts to make a home for himself. That one of the things he does is that when the tractor breaks down, right, Jonathan gets a little frustrated by it and is like, well, I guess we're gonna have to push it back. And then Superman just like picks it up and just starts carrying it. Now, seemingly he's done this kind of thing before. John makes this comment that like, he guesses he'll never really get used to it. But the cool thing, and this is where you really start to see the impact of Kal-El, is he says, I know you don't understand a single word that I'm saying, but I need to say this anyway, if I can even wrangle the words. Thank you for what you've done for us, you amazing angel. And I don't just mean you lugging our tractor around, because Martha's the one saying thank you. And she says, you saved my Jonathan. I was worried I'd lose him when we lose this farm. You helped him remember who he is. That man would have made one hell of a father. And while Clark is carrying the tractor, right, Jonathan is saying, you saved Martha. I'm worried without the farm, she would have had nothing left to mother. And I don't think she could stand losing any more babies. And so in his way, he's given them both a sense of purpose, right? With the farm falling apart and with Lazarus doing what they're doing, it was kind of the entire basis behind their existence. But if that basis is gone, what else is there? And that's the most important thing to take away from his impact with them, right? Because there is no grand purpose for why we do things, right? It's simply just that we are born into the world and we just figure out what makes us happy. And then when we figure that out, we just do that until we stop being happy, and then we go figure out something else. And that's it, right? Life is nothing more than just a series of what are hopefully great moments, one after the other, and just learning about ourselves. And that's basically it. And so with Clark showing up here, Kal-El showing up here, and giving them a kind of sense of purpose that they otherwise were basically losing, it actually restores their desire to live. So in essentially saving himself, he saves them. I know it sounds cliche, but it fits in perfectly with the entirety of the Superman mythos. And so that's why Jonathan says, I don't know what you are or where you came from, and I have not heard any language that sounds anything like the one that you speak. And then again, Martha says, but I know a farmer's boy when I see one, and I know you came here searching for something. It might just be it's the same thing that we were looking for too, and I just hope that maybe we can find it together, right? It's a beautiful moment, because when you have Kal-El, who's now working on this tractor, Saul reappears, right? It just kind of reactivates after having shut down. And it says, apologies, my recharging took longer than I anticipated. Kal, you need to be aware. I fear this system's yellow sun may be supercharging your Kryptonian cells in wildly unexpected ways. And Clark's like, you think? Here comes the clue train, Saul. The last stop is you. Yeah, man, it's supercharging my cells. And so he says, I should be able to help you process and control that solar energy. He says, I've also managed to review all available history of this planet. It's called Earth, and its human civilization is quite young, barely a few thousand years old. But right off the bat, right, Kal-El's just like, look, that's cool and everything. I don't need the history of this world. What I need you to do is I need you to download whatever language these people speak, right? And then I need you to shut up so I can just kind of clear my mind for a minute or two, right? And so following that, Saul does exactly that, right? It downloads the entirety of the language, and then Superman immediately understands it. Not that dissimilar from like Neo in The Matrix. And so you go back to Jonathan and Martha, we're just kind of having a conversation. Like, is he really trying to fix that bush hog out there? Like, I mean, I don't even have parts yet. Like, that thing is never going to get fixed. Cal approaches them and speaks English in a way they understand. And that's one of the things that's cool about this. Jason Aaron takes all these little things and just throws them in there, right? Like Clark's ability to learn English. It's simple, elegant, right? It's almost elegant in its simplicity, right? It's incredible the way that it's done. I love it. And so when he tells them, my name is Kal-El, initially Martha's just like, what a beautiful name. Like, that's an incredibly beautiful name. And she's like, well, it's a pleasure to meet you, Kal-El, right? I'm Martha. This is Jonathan. And for the first real time, they're able to communicate. Not only that, Saul tells them, like, I've detected drones that hover around up here in the sky, and I've done the liberty of taking them out, right? So the drones are destroyed, and now rain returns to the Kent farm. And while it's not enough to restore their crops, right? Their crops were basically done and gone for the season. It is enough to restore the farm. And in fact, we're even told that it rained for 3 straight days. Now, as you guys know, this is a absolute universe comic, which means things are wonderful, things are beautiful, fantastic, and it's all about to go south. Because a guy is riding by and literally rats on the Kents, right? He calls Lazarus and he says, I want to report an immigration issue because that guy's not supposed to be there. Lazarus comes rolling in and they immediately go after him, right? Now, of course, Superman helps these guys understand their place in the bigger picture, right? You are only as capable as Superman allows you to be. And at any point in time, whatever strength you have, he could take away. And then you become as useless as tits in a boar hog. And that's kind of what he does here, right? Immediately, he just overpowers these guys. And he was like, I mean, it's adorable that you think you could come here and do anything. It's really cute. But understand, right? If you live to see the dawn, it's because I allow you to, right? And just like attacks these guys. Well, doesn't really attack them, but like blows all these guys away. And he asks Saul, like, why are they doing this? And the response of Saul, because we do not belong here. And he says, well, then tell them who we are, right? Tell them why we're here. And Saul's response, it does not matter, right? We are not supposed to be here. And that's why they are attacking us, because we are in a place that we are not supposed to be. And you cannot force your will onto other people. And so in response, like Saul just kind of says, I cannot tell them why we're here. I cannot tell them what our mission is. And in fact, with everything going on and knowing that Lazarus is full of a bunch of crazy guys and they're going to start opening fire, right? You know, soldiers with no real laws to keep them in check, that in turn, Jonathan and Martha tell him, you should just go. Right? Like, you really should just go and keep yourself safe. And he does exactly that. Now, it's a crushing moment for Clark because after having lost so much for the first time in his life, he's actually experiencing what it's like to have a home. And then immediately it's stripped away from him by people who just don't want to see him there. So he immediately takes off into the sky, right? And he says, for almost 5 years, I would run to other farms far away, to factories and mines, cities where the people were piled on top of each other like trash, and islands where you could stay for days and never see another soul. But nowhere stayed safe, not for long, and no place felt so much like hope as the home that might have been. So seemingly, he never went back to Smallville. He never returned. Right? That was it. And so following that, you actually pick up with Lois Lane, again, who's kind of doing this whole investigation into Superman, who he is, what his whole deal is. And she figures out that he's in Smallville, or from Smallville, and she goes to investigate. She ends up showing up at the Smallville Senior Living Home, and she asks, right, I'm looking for Martha Kent. Is she a resident here? And the woman says yes, in our memory care unit, lovely woman, a sad story though. So seemingly Martha started developing Alzheimer's, because that's the question that Lois asks, like, what is that? Are we talking like Alzheimer's or something along those lines? And that's what the woman's like, I mean, who are you? Like, are you a friend of the family or a relative? And Lois is like, no, right? But you might say that I'm a friend of the family. And then at that point, you cut over to the Nevada desert. Now, here's the thing about this, right? Technically, Lois Lane does work for Lazarus, but she is starting to kind of branch off and do her own thing as she starts to realize Lazarus is not really what she thought it was. And so while she hasn't completely disavowed herself of the organization, this investigation she's conducting inducting into like the history of Superman and like where he came from, what he can do, it's off the reservation, right? It's her just kind of doing her own thing. And so what you do is you pick up with a conversation between Brainiac, the guy that kind of controls Lazarus and conditions them, which seems to be more of an artificial intelligence than anything else, and some person who exists out there. Now, the cool thing about this is we are actually going to get this indication that Brainiac is an actual living sentient being. Now, whether or not his story fits in with the main DC universe, right, a 12th level intellect and yada, 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 we don't know. The Absolute Universe is a lot more grounded than the normal DC universe is, so we may not necessarily see those crazy flights of fancy that you would see in the main DC comics. But the conversation is interesting because it goes like this, right? The Brainiac says, Agent Lane is quite the dogged investigator. She's required barely any coaxing on my part, just a nudge, really. And this person says, then all the pieces are in place. And that's where Brainiac says, yes, I believe they are. And so that's where this guy responds, and he says, I must say, I have often doubted your methods, Brainiac, along with your very sanity, but you deliver what you have promised me, and you ensure your place in the world that is coming. And that's where Brainiac says, of course, sir, I'm just happy to be a servant to the higher cause. Because what it does is it picks up and it says, Lazarus Pit deactivating. And this guy says, so say we all. Salvation is close at hand for billions upon billions. And he says, once the Superman kneels at the feet of his holy father, Ra's al Ghul. And I'm excited to see what absolute Ra's al Ghul looks like, guys, because he looks amazing. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Let me know what you think down in the comments section, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.